Thank you. Yep. So again, thanks everyone for joining in this morning to hear us speak. Um, And again, I just want to give a brief update and contextualize the conversations we're going to be having later today. So, this piece of work that we've recently and now published up at Zanzic is a very high level strategic document. It's intended as a resource to align and prepare all of us at the CAM industry into for the next stage of sector development. And as Tim alluded earlier, it incorporates the four key pieces of information and market intelligence that Zenzik holds. Those being, for those of you familiar with our insights work, the roadmap to 2035, the analysis of the strengths and opportunities of the UK CAM supply chain, the understanding that we have into the international CAM landscape, as well as specific feedback gathered at an event the late stage of 23 last year. And what we did with this work is we looked at all of the data we have in these assets and identified what are the most prominent and urgent topics that need to be addressed to unlock the potential for CAM at scale by 2035. And as we will present you the seven key topics we've chosen in a second, it is worth noting that we chose to take a more non-technological focus with these, as traditionally there has been a lot of investigation into the technological needs and sides of what's needed to get the CAM services and products to market. So next slide, please, Tim. Tim. Can I move one more? Sorry. Right. So, as I said, these are the key seven topics that have been prioritized based on our understanding and the robust repository of information we've got at Zenzik. So today I'm going to focus on the CAM identity, and then later I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to give us a breakdown onto his thoughts on the business case, and then Sam is going to share his personal experience with the CAM insurance market in a little bit. And I strongly encourage all of you to actually seek out the rest of the topics that we will not touch upon in this webinar today. By looking into the report that's available on our website. And while we identify all of these topic areas and we look into them in detail individually, it is very much worth keeping in mind throughout the entirety of today and when looking into the information that these topics, however, do not sit in isolation alone, and it's going to become very clear that these are very interrelated. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. So what's the big picture is, as I think all of us have experienced, the UK CAM landscape is quite complex. And I think trying to identify the opportunities that lie into it directly reflects onto that complexity onto the diagram that's presented on the slide that shows where the opportunity areas lie. For example, looking into this landscape, this diagram, becomes to me immediately apparent that the focal point of all the opportunity and all the effort is the creation, evidencing of this viable commercial business case, as it's the key lever to any commercial activities. However, as you can see, sitting in the center, all of the remaining pieces of the puzzle that are connected to it need to fall into place. Things like insurance products being readily available, the clear regulation needed, a common vision for the sector direction, or as we like to call it in-house, the CAM identity that I'm going to talk about today. And looking into the CAM identity, it almost sits on top of all of the other elements. And while it incorporates a lot of elements and aspects into it, to actually start addressing it, not all of them need to already be solved or need to lie in place, which is why we have chosen to start disseminating this concept with you today. So next slide, please, Tim. So what do I mean when I say CAM identity? This concept came about through our international connected and automated mobility landscape piece that looked into investigating and evaluating the CAM market of other key CAM players onto the global stage. So looking into each their individual markets, it became collectively clear that each player is exhibiting this CAM identity, whether consciously or not. And this identity is very much shaped by the technological application focus being set by both government and industry interest. It is shaped by the industry supply chain strengths. And again, when I talk about strengths, I mean the broader industry strengths of the country, but also the CAM specific ones. Um, what shapes it as well is what is the early adoption of the earliest CAM market ready elements, as well as the societal direction that is needed for those products and services. So bringing the conversation back in introspectively into the UK, great following the same criteria for the UK, it's apparent that it's lacking this common vision for the placement of CAM activities within the broader UK industry. I think all of us can recognize that we are still at a very early stage of sector maturity. And while there are a lot of significant strides that are being taken into the development, we're still in a very fragmented development state. There's clusters of activity, but all of us are seeing this lack of strong demand at the moment and lack of strong market pull to drive up the development of the technology as well as its implementation. So to that end, the need and opportunity is there for the creation of a consolidated vision for the sector. And what's envisioned by a consolidated direction, it's a direction that leverages and is set to learn from the high value early opportunities that lie in different use cases such as off-highway, freight and logistics, passenger transit. It is about a vision that builds upon the inherent strong areas in the CAM supply chain, things that largely don't require such a high capex, such as software and engineering services, as well as a common vision that recognizes and leverages the global market opportunities that exist at the moment, opportunities in areas such as CAM-specific insurance products and services. Again, for anyone further interested into how the CAM identity has played out abroad and what the global opportunities are, I would very much encourage you to access the international landscape piece that's also available on our website. But as I said before, where does the opportunity actually lie into the CAM identity piece? And it is very much about the sector messaging on a national level, but as well as broadcasting that internationally to attract attention and to be loud and proud about the progress that's happening in the UK. And as the level of maturity right now is still low, now is the opportune time to focus on the priority applications and implementation areas without disrupting existing supply chains. And to foster the strong market pool that's needed to vitalize the demand for services and products, these services need to be aligned with the actual need of the public. And to that end, early engagement and collaboration with operators and commissioners to inform the demand prioritization for this consolidated CAM vision would ensure the eventual buy-in once commercialization is closed. And looking into the specificity of how development is clustered in the UK, yes, there's definitely the clustering of capability within the different supply chain sectors, the different supply chain categories, but there's also very much the geographical distribution of activities. And it is the case that this local and regional identities can be leveraged and used as stepping stones to create the broader UK vision. All of these opportunities are there to ensure the strong positioning of the markets going forward. Next slide, please. So why why have I brought this to your attention today? And I'm very much not going to go through the text on the slide. It is easy to understand and disseminate. But I think what's important to take away is that the way that CAM identity I've described today, while it's intuitive to think that will be something officially agreed and signed off, it is actually the individual contributions to this vision conversation that would have the larger impact. It is very much the case that the CAM identity is a conversation to be had at every level to bring together the industry and align, especially now going into this new stage of development, into this next phase of CAM. And the need for united front is there because the more commonality in the approach and the standardization we bring to our conversations, the stronger the UK front will be and be able to achieve even greater results for the CAM sector in the UK. So with this, I'm going to shut up now and check if there's any questions.
Would someone be able to, from the Zenzik team, while I've got my screen on share, be able to check in the chat for hands raised and help with this part, please?
Yeah, I'm doing that, Tim. I've got my eye on the chat. Yeah, if you do think of anything over the next 45 minutes, then put it in the chat and we'll do our best to answer it, or we'll take it away and come back to you.
Quick point on that, if that's okay, Simon from Bosch.
Perfect. So I'll take over. Thanks, Teodora. Hopefully you can all see my screen. As we mentioned, and I'll reference back to the paper as we go, but the commercial business case is hugely important for organisations looking to make the most of, well, any commercial opportunity, but particularly in an emerging and growing field, I think it's particularly important. And Zenzik have quite rightly called that out. So I'm just going to touch on a few things that I think from the paper and from the research that I think are particularly relevant for those that are in this space and looking to build a position. I'll put this full screen so people can see as well. Within I won't expect people to read this, but as part of the research paper, for each of those elements that I had on screen, the Zenzik team have pulled together a view of what those challenges are, what the opportunities are, and what the recommendations are. And I think from this view and from the recommendations in particular, I've just pulled out 3 elements that I think are incredibly important when you're building a business case. And this doesn't necessarily apply to just CAM. It's relevant in CAM, and there's an awful lot within here, but it's actually just fundamentals of building a good business case for any business or business model or emerging business model that you're looking to bring to market. So I think it's really important that we focus on 3 things in particular. So the first is the Zenzik research particularly calls out focusing on high opportunity areas. And I think the important word there is focus. And it's focusing on where problems can be solved today. One of the big challenges we see with startups and with businesses in general when they're looking to launch new products is we get fixated on this idea of the product being excellent or the technology being superior. But we don't necessarily then talk about, and what does that superior product or superior technology actually solve a problem for? And that is a real flaw in how businesses go to market, is being focused on the superiority of a product rather than necessarily what the problem it's solving. And so I think that focus on the right areas and focus on the problem that you're solving becomes a much more effective way to build a commercial business case. Linked to that, it's then about finding those early commercial use cases and finding the customer that is willing to pay to fix that problem. And I think, again, certainly when you're a startup or when you're a smaller company looking to grow, identifying who your target customer is so important, and identifying what that target customer is trying to achieve and how you can help them solve it is the way that you demonstrate revenue early. It's the way that you demonstrate a run rate and a route to increasing growth and increasing revenues over time. And it's just the best way to build a business case that stands up to scrutiny from investors, is actually having either revenue in the bank or a clear customer that's already onboarded, already part of the challenge and interested in solving a problem with you. And the third, which I really like the wording around in the report, was creating technology stepping stones. And from that, what I took away was it's really important to think about how you can be flexible and how you can be agile and how you can respond, rather than having to pave the entire road and show the entire route. You just need to have the stepping stones that start to get you there, and being able to demonstrate we have a view of what the end goal is, but actually we want to start small, we want to be able to scale, we want to be able to scale quickly, and we want to be able to respond and be responsive to where the market moves, especially in areas like CAM where the market moves quickly. Different areas become more open to the technologies that we're promoting and we're talking about more regularly. So I think these three elements for me are hugely important. That idea of focus, that idea of meeting a customer need, and that idea of being agile and flexible. And I'm going to touch on each of these in a little bit more detail now. So when we talk focus, it's really hard to be focused in an area where there is so much potential. And this isn't even the full gambit of where you could choose to focus as a provider of technology or product into the autonomous market, right? There are so many areas and use cases that could be applied. The challenge we have, and we see this across not just CAM, but across most industries, is when a startup or a company gets set up, they build this product and they'll develop a really amazing technology. And so they'll be really focused on making that thing on the left-hand side of this slide as incredible as possible and the best in class. But if you can't then translate that best-in-class technology into how did it solve a problem in one or more of these areas on the right-hand side within this industry, you're never going to get that customer pull that is required in order to actually develop and grow a business. You've seen things like with Origo in the aviation space, they've been able to develop they found a target market. They started with a technology, they then found a target market, and they focused in on that space to develop and find a product fit that was solving a customer need in an area that is more amenable to the technology. And that's where I think the difference between off-high and on-highway is really important in the CAM space. Because if you can find closed loop systems or safer environments in which to prove your technology, and then you can take that into on-highway applications, you're much more likely to see investment and you're much more likely to see uptake of that product and of that market. So I think for me, part of that focus is not only is about focusing beyond just the technology, finding a use case that's relevant and finding one where there is real application sooner rather than later. So you don't necessarily have to build for a future where there are driverless vehicles and everybody is hands off, facing the other way, not looking at the car. Actually, building something that provides an autonomous solution today in a closed loop environment is hugely beneficial, provides a business case or an element of a business case that can then be scaled over time. So I think focus on where you can solve a problem is really important. The next is then which customer or who your customer might be and how you're helping them to solve said problem. And I've taken just an excerpt from another Zenzik report, the Identifying the UK CAM Supply Chain, because as a part of, or as someone trying to enter or be a part of that supply chain, you need to understand where you fit, and you need to understand who's going to be willing to pay for what you're offering. So if you have a great product, is it a tier one that's actually going to be your buyer, or are you trying to compete and go directly to the OEMs? Or actually, is your offer and product actually of most relevance to, say, an insurance provider? Because by providing them with more data, depends on the product, obviously, but you have to think about where your product fits and who you could be targeting. And one of the ways in which we tend to do this at PA, as I sit in our growth strategy practice, and we do a lot of work around proving the value of product, helping grow that and helping launch products into the market. We tend to talk about customer value proposition, which I'm sure many of you will have seen before. But the key for me is being really clear and being able to answer all of these questions. So you need to, at the start, as you're building a product and as you're building a business, you need to be able to say, who is your market and who are your target customers? And then you need to be able to translate that into what's the issue or the unmet need that they are unable to resolve today. And you don't have to solve all of their problems, but you have to be solving some sort of problem in order for them to be willing to pay you. You then need to be able to articulate what your offer is, and you need to be able to do that relatively succinctly. I've been in lots of pitches with startups where you have to really dig deep and dig into the pitch to really understand what it is they're offering and what the benefit is to me as a buyer. And I think one of the things that I try and, when we're talking to startups and they're building that pitch case to investors and to clients and to customers, is to put the benefits first. What's the benefit to me as a buyer? How does that fit and how does that work? And what's that reason to believe? What's the evidence that supports that? And that's where, when we talk about evidence, that's where things like the CAM Scale-Up program are really important. And things like piloting and testing are really important, because you need real data points to give people the confidence that what you're saying is true and what the benefit you're saying you can deliver is actually achievable. So if you can articulate who you're targeting, you can articulate what your offer is, and you can articulate what the benefit is of your product or service, then you can start to talk about a go-to-market plan. How are you going to engage with those customers? How are you going to target them? What's your route to meeting them? How do you get in a room with them? How do you find the investment to support you? What's your key communications? And one of the things that we don't often talk about is what's the trade-offs. Your product or your service may not cover everything, but it's better for you to be upfront and aware of what you don't do versus your competitors, and being aware of what you do and what you do better. And that for me is a really important aspect that people often don't think about, is actually we're not trying to solve all of your problems, but we will solve this problem in a particular way that allows you to really change the way that you're delivering your business or realizing efficiencies or whatever that might be. And I think the interesting one, there's a really interesting example of, if you think about some of the business cases historically in CAM, the argument that first was put forward was you can take people out of, say, you can take the driver out of the vehicle. But if your predication of taking the driver out of the vehicle is the only benefit you can offer, and so the benefit that you're offering is a operational saving to the bus company or the train company or whatever that might be, actually, when you then dig into it further and you say, but we do need someone on the bus to be responsible for monitoring ticketing, for instance, that business case and the benefit that you are offering is no longer relevant, because you still have the same operational overhead cost of a person in the vehicle. But if your benefit case and the benefit and the positioning that you're putting forward is you're creating a safer product and a safer drive and a safer environment, you are delivering kind of services that would otherwise be unattainable or unserviceable in areas where, for instance, there's less access or less public transport. There are elements where you can start to build a case that operational saving is no longer the reason to believe and the benefit that the customer is paying for. And so the more you can have those nuggets of information as to why your product and your service is of benefit, the more strong your commercial case becomes. And you want to have multiple, where you can, you want to have multiple kind of legs to your stool that allow you to say, this is why this product and this service is of benefit to you as a buyer and as a client. So I think for me, make sure you're focusing on the right areas and you can provide a real world example of where you can deliver value. Make sure you're then identifying the right customers and the benefit you can offer to them. And then the third piece is then how do we deliver and make sure that we can deliver and value at scale without compromising how we offer and work today. And the diagram on the right is the way in which we at PA talk about big digital transformation with large organizations. But I think the concept and principles are absolutely still true for a startup. You want to have a really clear vision of what you can offer and be clear in that vision and how you pitch it. So think big. You want to be able to articulate the end state, especially when you're talking to investors. You're not just talking about in a year's time, we want to have a customer. You want to be talking about in 5-10 years time, the market will look like this and we will be an integral part of that because we have a route to get there that looks like this. We're working with these customers, we offer this benefit, and that can be scaled over time. It's important then to then say, how do you demonstrate value early and start small? And I talked earlier around piloting and trials and demos and the use of these sorts of scale-up programs to really get evidence on the ground of we have delivered this value for these customers in these ways in the past. And then crucial to then being able to make the most of it is then having an ability to scale fast. So building your product, your service, the way in which you operate with that end state in mind. And I'm not saying hire 500 people because you're planning to be on the FTSE 100 eventually. But if you can build your tech stack in a way that is completely scalable, where you're not reliant on, if I need to hire another me in order to make this bigger, what you don't want to be reliant on is headcount to drive your growth. And so the more you can build a way in which your product can be scaled and you can take on more customers without necessarily, so for instance, using cloud services and being able to just add more capability over time, the more effective your ability is to respond to opportunities as they come. What you don't want to do is be in a position where you have a great business, you have a market opportunity that comes up, you're not able to realize it because your business model is predicated on needing X number of people in order to be able to deliver. So there's a real kind of tension, but it's a good tension between being ambitious, being pragmatic in how you start and set yourself up, and then being able to pivot and building a flexibility in the way you operate to be able to then pivot further going forward. So that's, for me, some of the successful elements of a strong commercial business case. It's being incredibly focused on what you can offer and where you can offer it. It's identifying a customer need and being able to articulate the benefit early, and ideally locking down revenues to be able to prove that there is a viable business here that someone is willing to pay for, no matter how small. If you can get one person buying into your concept and buying into that as a principle that this product is of value, then it's a proof point that you can take to others. And then it's building with the end state in mind that you can scale without being limited by headcount, by resource, and by your ability, your own personal ability, if you're in a very small company, to then scale quickly. So I think if you can think with those three things in mind around a commercial case, I think that's where the real value comes, and it's something worth thinking about. I'm going to stop there. And I guess any questions or anything that has come up in the chat? If not, I will hand over to Sam.
Thank you, Tom. Just going to give everyone a minute in case they want to do hands raised or write anything in the chat, but it looks like stunned silence. Fabulous. If there's anything else, do write it in the chat and we'll make sure to come back to it as and when. So please do. In the meantime, I'm going to get the slides on for Sam next. So bear with me 1 second and we'll get going. Hopefully that's on your screen now, everyone.
Thanks, Tim. Yes. Thanks, Tom. Thank you for the introduction earlier. Too kind. just to quickly introduce myself, what we do is I'm Sam Tiltman. I work for Marsh McLennan, a professional consultancy company which advises clients of all sizes across the fields of risk, strategy, and people. I work in the risk part of the group, which is called Marsh, and our principal business or our value to clients is we advise them on insurance. We're an insurance brokerage, so we help design, place, and administer insurance, and we also provide risk advisory, particularly supporting clients with their enterprise risk management frameworks and operational risk management requirements. So that's really the perspective I'd like to provide today, following on from the opening from Teodora, the report, which is fantastic. And it's always good for us when we see our industry and the dreaded I word or insurance mentioned and those interdependencies. And we were having discussions the last few weeks preparing for this session today, but also over many months and years about how important insurance is to the overall equation. So it's really a privilege to be here today. And actually, if we talk about those 7 areas that Teodora mentioned, we actually in my company work across all 7. So it's just great that actually this is seen already with Zenzik and your stakeholders, how important it is for those areas to collaborate. So if I just sort of open my remarks about insurance on the next slide. For me, it's really representing the CAM space or the CAV space to the insurance industry. It is one of the crucial components in getting AVs operational and enabling trust. Typically, for most industries I've worked with in my career and even today, we advise both companies in this sector, but also other companies either entering or considering to enter. So a lot of my work and my team is engaged on working with very large automotive OEMs who are either investing directly or indirectly into this space, or they just need to learn more about how this can potentially disrupt them. And what's come up through our conversations all the time is actually insurance is legally required, right, for vehicles on the road across multiple jurisdictions, but is also a key part of the equation in helping enable and build and sustain trust in new technologies. And we've had that experience with previous disruptive innovations in my firm. Most recently, you could argue the internet, e-commerce, cloud computing. All of these innovations require trust from the public and stakeholders who represent us in order to be deployed both legally and commercially. So it's a great opportunity for me, my industry, and my peers. The second point is we used a sumo wrestler here to demonstrate the issue. And actually, Tom mentioned this earlier, is actually commercial operations or commercialization. That story, the route to profitability or making operations commercial is crucial. Typically for a new mobility company, insurance is one of the highest cost constituents in the business model. So actually, if you can get the risk and the insurance piece right or wrong, that can actually be the difference between a profitable and unprofitable enterprise, or a key component of the company's equity story. We mentioned IPOs or the aim to go towards the FTSE or the NASDAQ. To become a certain size, one of the key components of the equation is managing the total cost of risk. And we have seen companies fail or fall down because the insurance costs have been unsustainable, particularly across other new mobility sectors, including micromobility, peer-to-peer sharing, vehicle sharing, electric vehicle OEMs as well. So a lot of those have had issues with insurance. So I would remark that actually, as you're building business models and looking into commercialization and the company strategy, actually insurance is a strategic topic, not a reactive operational thing to do down the line. The third one for us in our industry is it's really an opportunity to drive down risk globally, improve societal outcomes and increase efficiencies. And Tom mentioned quite a few things earlier about the business case is solving problems. And for us, insurance is one of the opportunities to solve problems. But autonomy in itself, when it delivers upon its premise, will be saving lives, increasing efficiency, but also increasing access to new services. So a lot of my clients everyone sort of likes to focus on robo-taxis. They like the name, the idea, the concept, we are actually now seeing a lot more innovation in new mobility services that use autonomy to provide access to new types of services that can complement existing public and private ones. So from Marsh McLennan perspective, we see particularly autonomy as being part of the overall equation, not considered in isolation, which is very exciting. The fourth sort of point for my opening remarks is actually a lot of people groan and complain about insurance being slow and backwards looking, and it can be a blocker to new mobility clients. So the mission in my group and my team really is to help make it a business enabler, not an inhibitor. But again, that comes down to actually embracing risk and insurance in the business model and at the executive level. And I'll share a couple of insights soon. What I'd like to remark here is the insurance industry really has a long-serving track record of supporting innovation. So there's a few examples: the aerospace industry, satellites and telecommunications, the internet and e-commerce, and obviously international shipping and commerce. So for us, we actually view this and advocate within Marsh to have insurers actually consider this to be the next huge disruption, but also something we can support like we've done in the past. Has bigger societal outcome. And then last but not least is actually two sides to the coin. So there is an opportunity for my industry, but actually if when AV becomes mainstream and actually the primary mode of transport for goods and people, both public and private domains and industrial applications, this will significantly disrupt my own industry. So our early research shows that typically, if we look at gross written premium, which is top line revenue for insurance, across most established markets, it's anywhere between 30 to 50% of my industry's revenue is for motor, automotive and related lines. So you imagine if we were to remove a lot of that risk and reduce it and reshape it, that will completely disrupt and change my entire industry, which is really exciting. And I think when we last spoke at the CAM Innovators event, I used the word terraform, and I still stick by that. I do feel autonomy and connected vehicles in themselves will create a level of disruption on that scale for my industry. So this is the sort of remark we're giving. And so what we're saying to customers in this field is embrace insurance, but also my industry needs to step up. And this is a great opportunity. So that's my sort of opening remarks. But I think today, some of you might be interested in going into a bit more detail about the risk and insurance challenges. And I will share some insights on, more particularly for the group here, we are a global company and we do deal with deployments, particularly in the US and EU, as well as the UK. I will share some insights on the UK AV bill and risk and insurance considerations. But before I sort of go into a bit more detail, were there any questions on the sort of high level stuff? Oh, brilliant. Okay. So if I could go to the next slide, please, Tim. Thank you. So what are the key insurance considerations? And this is based upon my group and my company's practical experience on getting autonomous vehicles on the road or industrial applications. Really, traditionally in the insurance industry, we sort of tend to look at a risk, and the whole industry is based on what we call product silos. So here's motor, here's product liability, here's cyber, here's directors and officers liability. And so you just buy an assembly of products based upon risks. Now, what we've really seen for new mobility is you require more of a horizontal approach. You need to look at the operation and the risks more holistically and actually build an assembly of products or an overall solution. So the traditional insurance approach of going to market and buying individual products with individual companies, individual advisors, really does not work well for new mobility, particularly autonomous vehicles or semi-autonomous vehicles. So for us, it's all about that horizontal approach, looking at the bigger picture, looking at the commercial, or sorry, the deployment model, the R&D plan, the roadmaps, the operating design domains, all that sort of stuff, and actually building something bespoke which responds to your needs and the particular risk landscape. Number two actually is related to all these points, is co-creation flexibility. A lot of insurers are known, or the insurance industry, from being quite inflexible. You know, here's a risk, go and talk to that department, go and buy that product. We do find actually a lot of this stuff is cutting edge, and a lot of these business models are new. We do have to co-create together between the client, ourselves as the risk advisor, and insurers and reinsurers to develop something that responds to particular needs of that particular business case and that particular deployment. At this point in time, there are no magic out-the-box solutions, particularly as we sort of drive through these different phases. So we do look for insurers who are willing to be a strategic partner, but likewise, we also see clients who view insurance strategically like we do and like our other clients. If you sort of seek to look at it transactionally, just try and get the cheapest deal possible with any insurer, do it last minute, we find that that really doesn't work well, because sustainability is crucial in building these solutions. We have seen clients sort of go for the cheapest deal with a non-specialist insurer, and as they sort of go through that exponential growth or expand their activities, the insurer midterm says no, and then they have to sort of panic and go out to market and buy something else. So for us, it's all about finding the right insurers who look at the strategy of the client and who are in for it for the long term. Then the third point is actually, it's easy to talk about R&D and testing and mapping activities, which themselves require certain levels of insurances and risk management. But the crucial differentiator is when you start going pre-commercial, proof of concept, or going into commercial applications, both public and private sectors or hybrid scenarios. This can create insurance and risk challenges because we're obviously moving from non-commercial entities or enterprises towards commercial deals where contracts are signed and there are stipulations on liabilities, both insurable and non-insurable. The fourth point is, I mentioned before, we need to consider actually where you're in public or private domains. Obviously, public are heavily regulated. In the UK, we have Road Traffic Act, certain insurance obligations, but actually, even if you're going into private domains, partnering in sort of industrial applications, such as mines or ports or airports, which Tom mentioned earlier, those have particular risks, and those environments might demand certain levels of insurance, which can be surprising for customers. So I think I sort of resonate with some of the points Tom was making earlier, is when you're testing or going into new domains or new relationships, the risk on paper you might feel is the same, but moving from, say, a mine to an airport can be a game changer risk-wise. And this is where you need to sort of consider different risk environments and their different risk and insurance considerations. The second to last point, we can only insure something which is legal, which sounds like a stupid point, but actually it comes across a lot. Regulation is really quickly developing. There's no perfect regulation now, but from the insurance industry, we can only insure something that's legally permissible to insure and pay claims. So there's an intimate linkage between regulation, law, and insurance, which was outlined earlier in the Senzik report under the interdependencies. So there's a very, very tight correlation and relationship between insurance and regulation. Last but not least is what we call the transition period in March. We're all talking about the future having full autonomy or majority autonomy, but in this sort of transition phase, we are going to have a mixture of different business models, different technologies, and different levels of autonomy. And this sort of grey area does present quite dynamic liability shifts and environments, which need to be navigated very carefully. Just to provide some sort of insights as well internationally, as I mentioned, we work globally in Marsh. I think we give an idea, we worked on about 70% of the US's autonomous miles last year, and we work across EU states and in different applications. So we got this sort of privilege of being able to view different challenges, both risk and insurance, but also regulation. And sort of high level, a lot of you know this, so I won't go into too much detail. We can always go into it another time, is just comparing, and it's quite fascinating, the different approaches, regulatory ones, between US, UK, EU and China. And typically it's the markets, it's a philosophy from the stakeholders and regulators is Do you regulate first, deploy later, just more of a UK and an EU thing? Or do you just deploy now and work it out as you go along, which is clearly the case in the US and China? And that presents different approaches and different risks. So particularly if you've got companies here, obviously focusing on the UK, as you go into different markets, it can be a whole different ballgame. Even if you're doing the exact same sort of deployment, the same service, for example, comparing Germany with the UK, with the US, with China. And last but not least, we talk about insurance ecosystems across those different markets, state versus federal laws in the US, but also in the EU. We have EU sort of level laws and EC frameworks, but also local interpretations, and also regional versus national. So a very complex regulatory, legal, and insurance landscape. That's my sort of considerations we talk about when we support clients. I think my overall remark is actually the sooner you engage your advisors and your insurers, the better. And actually, as much insight as possible into your future business plans or ambitions is also important, because it's for us, if we select the right insurers who can grow as you grow, particularly if you're looking into different domains or different markets or different services, the last thing you want to do is mid-term have to arrange another program for another service. You really want to have one or two strategic insurers supporting you. So that's my sort of general insurance and risk overview of how we support clients in this space. Now, next, or last but not least, the next slide, I will talk more specifically on the UK AV bill, given the audience here. Now, we have prepared a paper, so if anyone's interested in the details, more than happy to share. A lot of work was done clearly over the last few years. My overall remarks are, this is just phase one, it's gone through. We're now talking about secondary legislation. One of the key things in the primary was insurance was not mentioned much. So this is in the second phase, the chance for the industry to step up, and actually a crucial thing that needs to be done. So the last thing we want to do is enable secondary legislation, which goes active, and then after the event, insurers say, we don't like that or won't support it. So we actually view the insurance industry stepping up in that phase two to be crucial for the country and the deployment. And that's something we're pushing quite hard in my company with the partners I work with, both clients and insurers and also reinsurers. We'll talk about the four sort of key points of the bill. A lot of you guys will know it, so I won't go into too much detail. It's about authorizing the AVs. Number two is liability, which is essential for us in the industry. Number three, which is very interesting, were marketing restrictions, really important. And last but not least is obviously automated passenger services. We do need to talk about commercialization. Everyone talks about or thinks about AVs. They think about private cars in the future driving you privately. But as a lot of us know here, those early business cases, or actually the crucial ones, will be hybrid public-private sort of services, or particularly public applications of AVs, which has its own expressed or specific regulations and considerations here in the UK. Now, just to give some of the high-level risk and insurance considerations, we mentioned insurance isn't mentioned much, so there's still work to be done, but there are applications on the road today, R&D, mapping, testing, pre-commercialization, so you can get insurance today and can get risk support. What I say about the specific risk and insurance considerations, for us, it's mainly you've got to think about who is going to be the operator or the owner. And we have specific language here in the UK now, non-user in charge, user in charge, and authorized entities. But I would say you've got to think about, particularly if you're in partnership arrangements, sometimes quite complex ones, who is actually the primary company or entity in charge, who's picking up the tab or going to be responsible for managing the risk first, identifying the risk, and then procuring the insurance, which successfully transfers risk, but also achieves legal obligations here in the UK. And then I mentioned earlier, we look at that horizontal approach. Let's ensure the movement risk. But actually, what was clear, we've been saying this for a few years in Marsh, but what was great from the UK EV bill is there are a number of other non-movement risks you need to consider, particularly across legal and regulatory. compliance, management liability, intellectual property, what a lot of people call cyber or technology risks, and other financial risks. So we always focus on the movement risks. What I'd also say is think bigger picture. Who is the person or the individual who's authorizing the activity? Are they adequately covered? Is there adequate risk management first? Can the company protect itself? There are loads of different things you need to consider, and we mentioned a few in the paper. So we always talk about motor risk or movement, but also consider all of those other risk categories. And then my last look on this slide on the AV bill is insurance is absolutely fundamental, as a lot of you know, and Sensic clearly know as well, which is great. We've got a whole section in this report. Without insurance, my industry deals with risk, right? So our industry is about understanding risk, quantifying it, and transferring it on a commercial and sustained basis. Now, you imagine is one of the key fundamentals of autonomy and CAM is for public acceptance, so the trust and safety equation. Now, how can we expect the public and our stakeholders to accept and trust AVs if the risk industry doesn't? So for us, insurance and risk is crucial to enable that argument and to support the broader other 6 interdependencies. So that's our sort of insight on the AV bill. Were there any questions or anyone interested in anything specific on the UK AV bill and its risk and insurance considerations? Yes, I've got one here.
Hi, Sam. Nick Reed, Reed Mobility and Chief Road Safety Advisor, National Highways. Great presentation. I'd love to see your paper on the bill, if that can be shared with the group. I was interested in your take on data and the data that you will need to see or exchange with the developers in order to demonstrate that the requirements of the Act have been met, so that that safety has been improved, that they're at least as safe as a careful and competent driver, that no categories of road user have been exposed to increased risk. So how will we get the data that satisfies those requirements?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks, Nick. It's always great to have different perspectives. So I'm an intermediary, right? So I represent my clients on behalf of the clients, and we go out and get deals from insurers and reinsurers. So I see, what do my clients say, what do insurers want and the reinsurers want. And there is a bit of a dynamic tension. When we're placing and designing these programs, insurers have a bucket list, a long list of things they need, as well as regulators, as you mentioned. Now, one of the key challenges is we also have data protection law, which is quite stringent, particularly in UK and EU. So if you give everything or collect everything the insurers, the reinsurers, the regulators want, that actually increases risk for the industry. Huge amounts of data can be processed and collected through AVs. It's incredible, the sensory data. Now, if you were to collect that and store that for regulators and insurers, there is a cost to that, which needs to go into the commercial equation. Now, from the insurer's perspective, we underwrite risks based upon data, and there are dynamic models. But I would argue sometimes a lot of insurers ask for a huge amount. We sort of challenge them and say, well, what are you going to do with the data? Because this costs money for our clients to collect and creates risk. And we also need to make that comply, or the industry has to comply with data protection laws. You imagine how much that will cost given the volumes collated by AVs. So I do feel that's one of the areas that needs to be worked on, as well as insurance. And there is an interdependency between what the regulators need and want, but also the insurers, because we need something that achieves the fundamental requirement, which is, are these vehicles safe? Is the technology safe? And if incidents happen, can we have access to the data? But on the other hand, we can't specify and ask for so much that actually creates risk for society in itself. So I do believe there is a sensible balance to be addressed and created over time. I wouldn't believe, based upon what I understand so far, that we're there yet. And I think this is where stakeholders, as well as insurers and clients, need to come to a sort of industry standard agreement on what's practical, considering data collection creates risk for all stakeholders. Did that sort of answer your question, or is there anything else?
Yeah, no, that's great, Sam. I fully agree. Need a practical solution. It's what I've been working on with BSI and others. Yeah, love to share more about it.
Yeah, I'll be definitely keen to follow. And I think one of the discussions I have, I'm quite lucky because I have a lot of industry groups in Marsh. We're constantly bouncing ideas. So I talk a lot with our aviation team and other regulated industries like marine. And we're thinking actually we can potentially learn from other transport sections that are highly regulated, particularly airspace, where health and safety and trust and safety is critical. So we are having those discussions, and it's maybe a full process for this group here is to consider engaging with the other industry regulators and stakeholders to see if we can learn lessons and practicalities that they have too.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I've got a summary slide, but I think I've gone through everything. I'm just wary of time. Were there any other questions for me? Brilliant. I think I won't go through these because I've gone over time. Sorry, Zenzik guys. But what I would say is, look, my key message to people going into operations is please don't make insurance an afterthought. We don't want it to be an inhibitor to your business. You need to really look at it as soon as possible. Get the right advisors in place, not only insurance brokers and risk advisors, but also lawyers and regulatory and other consultants. They're just as important because the last thing you want to do is you're ready to go and insurance holds you up. That's the last thing all of us want. That's it. Thank you.